Is Brian Thomas Jr. the Harry Houdini of fantasy football, just waiting for the right time to reappear and shock the audience? Or is the Brian Thomas that we saw in 2024 simply gone without a trace? When I was asked to analyze BTJ, I was honestly skeptical that the data would be able to provide any real insight into this player's historic sophomore slump. Fortunately, I could not have been more wrong. But before we jump in, I wanted to let you all know that I am doing team reviews completely free on my Discord server. The link and instructions are down in the description. And my reviews include both scoring for roster and contending outlook, in-depth team evaluation, and in-depth advice for this offseason. In order to fully understand what went wrong with Brian Thomas in 2025, we first need to understand his rookie season. The stats for the entirety of his rookie season include 16.7 fantasy points per game, 7.6 targets per game, a 25% team target share, over 10 yards per target, 2.66 yards per route run, and 14.7 yards per reception. But that doesn't tell us the whole story. There is a huge change in Brian Thomas's production and usage before and after the Jaguars bye in Week 12. When we look at the splits between those two separate portions of the season, Brian Thomas's fantasy production went up from 13.3 to 24 fantasy points per game. His targets also increased from 5.7 to 11.8. His target share also almost doubled, going from 19.6% all the way up to 36.2. His yards per target fell from 11.26 to 8.3. However, his yards per route run actually increased from 2.6 to 2.81. And in terms of routes, he went from 26 routes per game to over 35 routes per game. Looking at his efficiency metrics in the first part of the season, along with his lack of usage, it's no wonder that Brian Thomas broke out down the stretch his rookie season. Although I don't believe anyone really expected Brian Thomas to continue scoring 24 points per game into 2025, falling off and regressing all the way down to 10 points per game has been absolutely devastating, both for the Jaguars as an offense and for fantasy managers who were relying on BTJ. So what changed from year one to year two that caused this massive drop-off in production? Looking at the 2024 season next to the 2025 season, we can see that his targets are very similar to what they were in 2024. His target share has gone down about 5%, but really it's his yards per route run dropping to 1.53, all the way down from 2.66. That has been the big change for BTJ this season. He is even running more routes in 2025 than he had in the 2024 season on average. So why is his yards per route run so much lower when he is running a similar number of routes and is getting a similar number of targets? It's not his yards per reception, because there has been minimal change there as well, going from 14.7 to just 14 in 2025. The elephant in the room is actually Brian Thomas's catch rate. In 2024, his catch rate was 65.4% on the season, and now his catch rate thus far in 2025 is only 52%. Could BTJ be dealing with the same problems with uncatchable targets that Rome Odunze is this season? Surprisingly, the answer appears to be no. While many fingers are pointing at Trevor Lawrence as a significant cause for Brian Thomas's poor production, Brian Thomas's catchable target rate here in 2025 has been 74.6% on the season. That is 12 points higher than Rome Odunze's and is higher than Brian Thomas's catchable target rate his rookie season. That mark is also well above the league average for a player with an ADOT as high as Brian Thomas Jr.'s at 13. So then why is his catch rate 15 percentage points lower than in 2024? The answer is his true catch rate, which is defined as the number of catches on catchable targets. His true catch rate was actually really good last year during his rookie season at 89%, but it is now down to only 68.1% in his second season. Unlike a stat such as touchdowns, true catch rate is very resistant to natural variance because of the large sample size of catchable targets that a player like BTJ gets in a season. It is also resistant to the influence from outside factors such as the QB or the offensive scheme. It is a wide receiver isolating statistic. And here's the thing, looking at historical trends and true catch rate over the years, receivers' true catch rate is almost always trending up early in their careers. Even when there are decreases in the true catch rate, it's usually only a few percentage points, 2 or 3 at the maximum. Looking at the trends for most wide receivers, I would have expected Brian Thomas Jr.'s true catch rate to actually go up in his sophomore season, not down, and that would put him in the low 90s. Simply put, his true catch rate has regressed far more than one would reasonably assume could be accounted for regular variance. And transparency moment, I was not able to find Brian Thomas Jr.'s catchable target rate or true catch rate for specific stretches in the 2024 season. I could only find season long aggregate data, which means I do not have the isolated statistics for before or after their week 12 bye, or with Mac Jones versus Trevor Lawrence as the quarterback. So, how much has this single statistic really played into Brian Thomas Jr.'s lack of production this season? To explain, for every 4 targets that Brian Thomas Jr. gets, if we were assuming a reasonable bump in his true catch rate into the low 90s, then about 1 in every 4 targets, he should be getting an extra reception. Not every 4th incompletion, but every 4th time the ball comes in Brian Thomas Jr.'s direction. At 7 targets per game, that's 1.75 receptions that Brian Thomas Jr. is leaving on the table each and every week. With the efficiency metrics that he has displayed already this season, if he had those extra receptions, changing absolutely nothing else, he would be sitting at 14.5 fantasy points per game, which would put Brian Thomas around a high-end wide receiver 2 in points per game. So why is his true catch rate in the toilet? The yips narrative that he's lazy, he's no longer willing to take hits, there might be something there, but I don't really buy it. If there was no reasonable answer as to why his true catch rate regressed to this degree, then I might be inclined to believe one or more of those narratives. But we have a slam dunk reason for Brian Thomas's lack of production. BTJ has actually been dealing with a wrist injury all season long. We do not have access to the specifics of his injury, but the Twitter doctors think it's either a torn or sprained ligament or a fractured bone of the wrist. Not only would these injuries cause significant pain, but they could also destabilize a player's wrist. It really just makes too much sense for Brian Thomas's catch rate issues to be related to this wrist injury, especially since there have been almost no other changes from an analytical perspective. Returning to our original question, is Brian Thomas Jr. cooked? The data doesn't think so. The historic data on true catch rate would suggest that there is some external cause which is negatively affecting his true catch rate. However, I wanted to throw out 2 big asterisks just so you all have all the information. First, we do not know exactly what Brian Thomas Jr.'s injury is, and so there is a small chance that whatever the injury is could have lasting effects into the future. The second asterisk is that Tyreek Hill also played through a wrist injury for an entire season in 2024, and his true catch rate did not drop. However, this is a big gray area. We do not know what Hill's injury was or how severe, and we do not know what Brian Thomas Jr.'s injury is or how severe. And so even if they did have a very similar injury, it could still affect the players very differently. And so I did want to throw out this comparison because I believe it would come to mind for people, but I just do not think that we can really draw much information based on Tyreek Hill's wrist injury and his performance. So while I do think that Brian Thomas Jr. will bounce back and we will see a player that looks more like his rookie season, I will say that if you have BTJ in your lineups on your team for the rest of the season, I would not expect a big bounce back down the stretch. While I am very optimistic about Brian Thomas in 2026, if you are a fantasy manager holding him on your roster right now, I would not hold my breath for a late season bounce back or breakout from BTJ. It's simply very unlikely that whatever injury has plagued him all season would suddenly resolve at this point with just a few weeks left to go. And in all likelihood, he actually needs some surgical intervention in order to fix whatever the problem is. Moving on to what kind of production we could reasonably expect in 2026, we have already established that if BTJ had maintained his true catch rate from 2024 into 2025 and simply caught more of the targets he was already receiving, he would absolutely have at least 14 fantasy points per game. But there's a few other factors that are also negatively affecting BTJ's production this season. First up is that his snap share has only been about 80% on the season, and this should absolutely be higher, especially with a healthy Brian Thomas Jr. The second is BTJ's poor performance leading to less usage. I thoroughly believe that if BTJ was healthy, had a higher true catch rate, and was just performing better for the team, that he would be a focal point of this offense and drawing more targets per game, seeing more production. Third, Brian Thomas Jr. has been hit really, really hard by touchdown regression here in 2025. He went from 10 touchdowns over 17 games in 2024 to just one touchdown over his 9 games played this season. I do think that Brian Thomas can sustain a much higher touchdown rate than one touchdown in every 9 games when he's healthy, because he is a deep threat, big play receiver who should do well in the red zone. As soon as next season, 18 plus points per game is 100% within the range of outcomes for BTJ, even with Travis Hunter on the field. Now, next I want to look at, was BTJ's regression this season at all predictable? And of course, he wasn't going to continue scoring 24 fantasy points per game like he did down the stretch in 2024. But I really don't think that this massive drop off to 10 fantasy points per game was in any way predictable. Whether it's his wrist injury, the yips, or a combination of the two limiting his production, I don't think there was any analytical way to see this massive drop off coming. It looks like it was just bad injury luck for a very exciting player, and hopefully we can get back to a better, healthier Brian Thomas Jr. in 2026. Now, most of your trade deadlines have already passed, so the real question to finish out this video is what to do with BTJ this offseason. Based on this data, I think BTJ is going to be a fantastic buy low candidate, and I personally will be buying him at price this offseason. In redraft formats, although it's still way too early to be predicting ADP, I think I'll be happy taking BTJ as early as the beginning of the 3rd round, in the same range as players like Garrett Wilson, Kyron Williams, Ladd McConkey, or AJ Brown. And there's a good chance that you could even get him cheaper than that in a lot of leagues, maybe even 1 to 2 rounds cheaper. In Dynasty formats, BTJ is currently the consensus wide receiver 17. However, as soon as the offseason hits, I personally will be moving him ahead of guys like Rome Odunze, Garrett Wilson, and Nico Collins, who are all currently ranked ahead of him. And I will also have BTJ in a similar tier alongside players like Marvin Harrison Jr., Ladd McConkey, and George Pickens, provided that Pickens signs a multi-year deal with the Cowboys. If you can down tier from any of those players I just mentioned, either right now or after the playoffs, and get a legitimate plus on top, I think you'll get a significant value in. But it would be even better if you could package together some middling assets to go up and get BTJ instead. Maybe adding a early 2nd round pick or some player with equivalent value to a Devontae Smith, Jamison Williams, or Zay Flowers type of receiver. We'll have to see how this rookie draft season progresses, but as of right now, I would happily send the 105 or 106 in a heartbeat for BTJ, not even close. I hope that this video has been entertaining, informative, and helpful. Don't forget to join the Discord, linked in the description below, and follow the instructions to get your free team review. But other than that, thanks for watching and have a good rest of your day.